Good morning, my name is Grant, if we haven't met yet, and we are in a series called KickSTART, and we are looking at our year and how we can make some of those better decisions. And what we've been saying through this series is, not only do we want to make better decisions, but we want to make decisions that don't change just who we are on the outside, but go directly to who we are on the inside, and deal with major things that change who we are as a person and flow from that. And so, as we get started today, I want to kind of give a warning a little bit. Today's message is what I would call deep. Now, when I first started teaching or preaching or whatever, I found out that a lot of people had different definitions for what a deep teaching was, right? So people would refer to somebody that teached, and that teaching would be deep. And some people mean by that it's personally convicting. And other people mean by that it was like, it just really touched my heart, right? And other people mean by that it's intellectual, okay? That when people say things that are super intellectual, just kind of on that note, for our first service, when Bill was up here talking about the Super Bowl party we're going to have, the pregame show, he asked everybody to wear their jerseys and bring their foam fingers, and he said, bring your regalia. Does anybody know what that means? It's apparently a word that means, I know what it means now that I asked him, but anyway. And in the same breath, he asked you on the connection card to annotate something, right? So anyway, you've got this intellectual, and what a lot of people mean by deep teaching is that it's super intellectual, you know? Like, so, man, that teaching was good. He used like Hebrew words and Greek words, and he talked about the historical context, and because I didn't necessarily understand everything he said, it was deep, right? That's what a lot of times people mean by deep. And here we've been very intentional about what we mean by deep, because we don't necessarily believe it's intellectual or anything like that. We believe that deep teaching is when a teaching identifies or makes reference to a major heart issue. A major heart issue. And here's the thing. We don't like to hear about our major heart issues, right? And so the deeper a teaching is, at least by the way we define it, the deeper a teaching is, the less you probably want to hear it, okay? And so just a little bit of fair warning, you might find yourself balling up just a little bit today, but I believe this is what I would call something that's deep, and that we all, uniformly across the board, we all struggle with. Now, to introduce, now that I've sufficiently scared all of you, I want to introduce what we're going to be talking about today with a passage in 1 Timothy chapter 6. This book, love this book, this is the Apostle Paul writing to his young Padawan Timothy, and he's instructing him and giving him all kinds of instruction. Anyway, verse 6 says this, "But godliness with contentment is great gain." You got to know about me. I wander around my house muttering this all the time. Just godliness with contentment, just mutter it all the time. On an Xbox One, godliness with contentment is great gain. Right? I just wonder, saying it's a great line. Verse 7. "For we brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it." Now here's where we kind of go deep. If you'll let us, I think we can kind of dig maybe into your heart and my heart. "But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that." Right? So let's drag our heart into this a little bit. If you had food and clothing, would you be content with that? The answer is no. Probably. Most of us wouldn't be content a lot of us wouldn't be content if we didn't have the latest iPhone, right? Much less just food and clothing. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Now, contentment, that is a deep heart issue. With everything that we have in life and everything that we pursue, can you reach the place where you are a content person? Because when you reach contentment, you are at peace. But very few times do we actually have times in our lives where we are content. Verse 9. "Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction." Those are some pretty heavy words. And then he says a line that we've heard before. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It's really important how he worded that. He said the love of money, not money. Some people view money as evil, right? Money in itself is an evil. Like, for instance, a pen. This is what money is like. A pen in the hand of a poet is a beautiful poem. A pen in the hand of a junior high boy is like, destruction of public property. Okay, so it's not in and of itself bad. It's just money. What we do with it or our affection toward it is what matters. And he warns, the love of money is the root of all evil. And then he says something really heavy here. He says, some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Now, before we really jump into talking about that passage, I want to apply it, okay? And I want to apply it to two different groups of people. It's my belief that everybody in this room falls into two different groups of people. Loving of money. The first group is this. You don't have money, okay? Now, if you fall in that group, and what I mean by you don't have money is that the way you look at money, the money that you have, is you have enough to eat and live indoors and stuff like that. But when it really comes down to it, like you're not planning your next vacation to Europe, okay? You just have like what you need, and that's just kind of about it. So you, like me, would fall into that category. You don't have money, right? So you're in that kind of position. If you're in that position, I want you to pay close attention. Because a lot of times what we do is we hear that verse, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And we hear that and we go, yeah, that's a good verse, man. That's good, man. There's a lot of rich people that need to hear that, right? A lot of people that have money, rich people, they really need to hear that because our thought process is, I can't love something that I don't even have, right? But the truth is, absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? And many of you know what it's like to have an absence of money, right? I've been there. And I've found that it's true that actually the people that don't have the money find themselves loving the money more than the people that actually have it. And so here's what we do. These are the two things we do. We say, yeah, that's a good verse for rich people. And then here's the other thing. Nobody considers themselves rich, right? And so it's like, yeah, I guess this verse is for nobody, is what it comes down to. But anyway, wanted to make that clear, like, if you don't have money, don't think that this isn't talking to you. In fact, if you catch what he said there at the end, he says, some people eager for money, right? People that don't even have money, people that just want to have money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So, think about that. Second group of people I want to talk to are those of you who have money, okay? And that may be a smaller group, but those of you who have money. Now, here's the thing. If you have money, you've got money more than likely, unless it was just handed to you, because you know what it means to work hard, right? You had that job and you kept that job that you hated, but you held on to it. And you were wise. While everybody else was blowing their money on vacations and movies and going out to eat and just cars and stuff, you were wise. You held on to your money. You put it together. And so, more than likely, if you have money, that money represents to you your hard work, your sweat, and your wisdom, right? Here's the thing. A lot of times, because you've got so much invested in that money, it's really hard to part with. Now, in that same chapter, 1 Timothy 6, several verses down, verse 17, Apostle Paul writes this. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant. Right? Don't become arrogant because you've made all this money and you've got a lot of investment in there and you have a tendency to say, this is mine, I did this. He says, don't be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. Now, if you have money, what that probably means is you know how money works. And you know how it grows and stuff. And one thing you know is that no matter how much you have, it can go away like that. It can go away like that. And so you know that, and so you have a tendency to want to put more and more money between you and being on the street. So you know that it's uncertain. But to put their hope, he writes them, but put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Verse 18, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, which is the age after this life, after death, so that they may take hold of life that is truly life. In other words, he commands, he says, hey, if you got rich people, just command them this. Don't get caught up in this facade. Don't think about the reward here. This isn't where life is. It's in the age to come. Put your treasure there. So, just to make it clear, this verse isn't for nobody. This verse is for everybody. All of us can take a look into our heart and try to figure out if we love money. So that's the question I want to try to answer today. And I would like to ask you to look into your heart and say, hey, do I love money? Now, what we tend to have a tendency to do is with Scripture, we have the tendency to diffuse it like a bomb, right? Like every 90s movie that they ever made, it always ended up with there being this bomb and them rushing with just a few seconds left, and they crack open the case and they have the choice of do we cut the red wire, to cut the blue wire, to cut the red wire, and Mel Gibson and Danny Glover are there, and they're getting ready to cut one of the wires, and they're like, they just go ahead and they do it, and they cut the wire, and it's always the right wire, and I'm always thinking, just cut them all. Like, what? How bad could that be, right? Anyway, so as they're cutting the wire and they're diffusing it and everything's, a lot of times, if you watch, we do that with Scripture. A lot of times when we open up Scripture and we read it, we're like, oh, well, I don't like that. Or maybe I don't even believe that. Or I don't want to do that. That's not good. What do we try to do? Watch yourself. You'll do this. Try to diffuse it. All right, so we'll go, well, maybe that's not the right translation, right? So we'll put that down. We'll find another Bible and we're like, maybe that's the right translation. Oh, that's the same thing. Well, maybe it's the wrong word, right? So maybe these 93 theologians that got together messed up, and then we study and we come up with our own definition for a word or something like that. We have a tendency to like diffuse or diffuse. That's the right word. We diffuse, not intellectual, folks. Diffuse Scripture like it's a bomb. And when I say all this, this verse, love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, is super easy to diffuse. Because all we have to do is go, I don't love money, right? I don't love money. Because what we think of in our heads is, we think of boss hog when we think of money, somebody that loves money, right? That's what I think of. I think of every day I came home from school, and I had to get up on the roof and I had to change the antenna a little bit. I used to watch the Dukes of Hazzard. You could just barely see through it, right? But anyway, and every show, Boss Hog is sitting around counting his money or stacking his coins or rubbing it on his face, his money. And that's what we think of as somebody that loves money. And so when we read that verse and we go, oh, I don't love money. I mean, I've never rolled around naked in money, right? So I must not have a problem, right? Because that's the litmus test for whether or not you love money. And I just want to come along and say, well, maybe there's a better text than that, right? Maybe somebody that loves money, it looks quite a bit different from that. So I'd like you to look at your heart, and I want to just give you a few things that Scripture says about our attitudes towards money. The first thing is, how do you know if you love money? The first thing is, do you trust it? Do you trust in it? Do you put your literal trust and faith and belief in money? And I want to tell you, just kind of across the board, to some degree, it may vary from person to person, but to some degree, the answer to this question is yes, right? Yes, we do trust how much money we have in our banking account, how much we have saved, that's just something that happens. We put our trust in it. But to what degree? How much do you put your trust in? Because if you trust it as opposed to God, you might have a problem loving money. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says kind of a heavy statement. Matthew 6:19, he says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Now, you got to understand about that culture, they didn't have bank accounts. They didn't have 401ks. So if they got something, if they got a chest full of money, or they got a family heirloom, or they had a garment that was worth a lot of money, they literally would go put it in a room in their house, right? They would go store it in there. And on top of that, if you had a lot of money, sometimes you would have like maybe even a building devoted to it, but they didn't have necessarily a local bank. So Jesus is talking about treasure. He's literally talking about their treasure. They have a treasure room, or they have a treasure chest, or they have something where they put this stuff. And imagine if everything you own was in a room in your house right now. How worried would you be, right? You'd be kind of nervous, because I can guarantee you that back then, 2,000 years ago, the alarm system is not going to go off. There's no insurance. If somebody takes it, it's just gone, right? And so you would be constantly collecting and putting together, but you'd be constantly nervous that it was going to be stolen, that it would decay, that moths would come in and eat the clothes. And so Jesus is talking about their treasure room. He says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. See, if we're like that, we have that treasure room in our house, it's not much different than the way we are. We're constantly worried about our checking account balance. We're constantly worried about what we're bringing in as opposed to what we're sending out. We're looking at our credit card debt. We're thinking, oh my goodness, how do we get that much debt? We have a different kind of worry, but it's the same kind of worry. And Jesus is coming and saying, hey, don't do that. If you get trusted in that, you will drive yourself crazy. Don't trust in that, but put your investment in a kingdom that will be forever and ever and ever and ever. Not here on earth. Next verse. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, understand, this is a very literal statement. Right? This is not a figurative treasure. He's not saying, wherever your treasure is, like your heart treasure or your figurative treasure. He's talking about literally your treasure. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. If your treasure is here, that's where your heart is. But if your treasure's in heaven, if that's your great reward for everything you do, eternal life, then that's where your heart is. And he makes the point that those two things war against each other often. So he said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And everybody has this choice at some point in their life. At some point in our life, we get to a place, whether it's through a job placement, or it's something we do with our integrity, or what we're going to give, or what we're going to have with other people. There is a point in our life where following God and making and keeping and holding on to money butt heads, and they just do not work together. And God is going to say, you got to choose who you trust. Trust money, or do you trust me? So the first big test, do you love money? That comes down to whether or not you put your trust in it. The second one looks like this. I should be able to remember my own sermon, but I can't. There it is. I knew that. If God gets seconds, right? If God gets seconds. Now, there's a great verse in Proverbs, and it shows that there's more to than just figuring out what percentage you're going to give to God or what amount you're going to give God. When you're sitting down to think through, what do I want to give God? There's more to it than just the percentage and just the amount. It's actually the quality of the offering. In Proverbs chapter 3, it says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Now keep in mind, currency was not the only form of currency back then. That God would actually ask people to bring the stuff that they had as an offering. So he would come to people that had livestock, and he would say, I want you to bring me a bull. He'd come to people with sheep, he'd say, I want you to bring me sheep. If you have grain, I want you to bring grain. If you have grapes or wine, I want you to bring that to me, and I want you to bring it to me. I want you to offer it to me. And I want it to be the first fruits. I want it to be the best. Now, when I was growing up in northwest Nebraska, we loved sweet corn, right? Sweet, I mean, we're corn farmers, we grow a lot of corn for cattle, but there's only a small amount of sweet corn, and we love it. How many people, not just like, not can eat, but how many people love sweet corn? Got a few people in here, okay. I love this stuff, and we would get so excited about it. Last couple of weeks of July, we would go out there and we'd check it every week, every day. We're like, is it almost ready? And then when it was ready, we would go out and we would shop, and we would eat it. I'm not kidding. We would eat it every single meal except breakfast for like 3 or 4 weeks straight. It was just a staple, and butter and salt, and life is good, right? So we're doing that, and then Mom, what she would do during that time is she would freeze a bunch of the corn. So she'd cut it off the cob, and she'd put it in these little bags and stick it in the freezer. And it's good. I mean, it's just, you eat it through the winter, and it's great. And then about February, I don't know if Mom wasn't a very good planner or what, but we would run out. It was like the last bag of sweet corn. We're like, oh no, we're out of sweet corn. And then she would go to the store after we ran out of it, and she would buy canned corn, which we would eat it, and we would just kind of stare like we're farmers, and we're eating canned corn. It doesn't make any sense. And then somewhere about May, she would run out of canned corn, and she would like start to pull out of the shelves creamed corn, which is canned corn with mucus in it. You're at the end of your rope when you're eating creamed corn. And so we're eating that. And so you can see why we got so excited come July. It's like, just next month, there's sweet corn, right? It's going to be, and so we would wait, and we get there, and then all of a sudden that first meal, I once when I was 15, my first meal of sweet corn, I ate 15 cobs of corn, right? I don't know how I got to be so fat, but anyway, corn's what you feed cattle to fat enough. Anyway, so we're eating that corn, and that's just like the very best. That's like the sweetest part of farming, right? For all the other stuff you do, you get the first fruit. You get the first, and God's come along and saying, hey, I want you to give me your first fruit, which for us would have been like God was like, hey, I want you to, instead of that first week where you get that first bushel or two of corn, instead of eating it that week, I want you to bring that to me. Or if people had cattle, he would come to him. I mean, if you own cattle and God said, I want you to bring me one cow, I want you to bring me one bull, what would you do? You go out there and you find that one nag. You're like, hey, you got that one. That's all right with him. We're going to kill him later anyway, make hamburger out of him. So why don't you go take him into town? And God says, no, I want you to look at your herd, and I want you to select the very best. I want your first fruit. Or then you go to sheep. You know, if somebody had sheep, they look out at the sheep, and there's sheep are actually really beautiful. You got a lot of them. But then there's always just that kind of couple, that are really nasty and just barely walking and maybe even sick. And God says, I don't want you to bring them out. I want you to find your very best sheep. Bring me the first fruit of your crop. And grain and grapes. And that's what he would do. He's like, I want you to think about the percentage. God actually had a very specific percentage of it. But more than that, I want you to think about the quality. I want you to think about where that offering's coming from in your heart. And some of the times that God got mad in the Old Testament were the times where people were bringing him sick sheep. In other words, when a sheep is sick, I don't know if you're an animal lover, you're going to hate this, you just got to kill them. That's what you do. And instead of killing them, they offered them to God. Instead of just letting them die in a field somewhere, they brought that stuff. And that's what they gave to worship God. Now, I want you to think about that. Now I know you don't have sheep and cattle and stuff like that, but when it comes to what you have, what's the quality like? What do you give to God? What do you worship him with? What do you honor him with? Is it your first fruit, or is it kind of your leftover? Is it the first bill that you kind of figure out when you're planning out all your bills at the beginning of the month, or is it kind of the last bill that you figure out? Do you give God what you want to give and what you thought through to give, or is it everything that you've got left after you've, got your cable bill paid for, and got your nails taken care of, and got that car that you want, and gone on that vacation you want? Are you giving God leftovers? So he says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Next verse. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. And who doesn't want a vat full of new wine, right? He's saying, if you bring me what's first, I'm going to make sure that you have enough, more than enough. And he gives this kind of general blessing. And one of the big key here is, do you trust God or do you trust money? Do you love God or do you love money? And what you're giving to God and the quality of what you're giving to God is really determined that. Next one on here, the third way that we know whether or not we love money is if you're not willing to part with it. And this can be your offering at church, or this can just be your neighbor who kind of needs stuff, or you're willing to help that person out. Are you willing to part with it? That's a big sign as to whether or not you really have this love for money. Jesus gave this parable, heavy parable. He said in Luke chapter 12, and he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store all my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. I can identify this really clearly. My brother is actually a really successful farmer, and he made like $1 million the year before last, and he called me up to just be like, I didn't know what to do with all the money, but I didn't want to pay taxes on it, so I just built a shed that you can see from outer space. Right? Basically, he's just looking for this way to get out of paying all the taxes. So that's kind of what this guy's doing. He's going, hey, I've got all this stuff, and I don't have anywhere to put it. What am I going to do with all this? Next verse. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Drink. Be merry. In other words, I'm going to early retire. I'm going to take care of life, and I'm just going to enjoy life for the rest. Now, this is the key. We always have to go through this process. I know you don't have a barn, okay? So you're like, it doesn't apply to me, right? We have checking accounts, we have 401ks, and that's how we describe what he's describing here. Now, let me make it clear. Big believer in 401ks, big believer in savings and doing the right thing with your money. We actually promote and are teaching a class here called Financial Peace University where it teaches you how to be wise with money. So all that stuff is good, okay? But at the same time, that's what he means by barn. So there's this point at which you're just storing it up. And I love what Francis Chan says. We spend our life, this is our whole life, we spend our whole life saving and planning and getting ready for that last little section before eternity. Right? We got this life and we're right here and we're worried about this, and then there's eternity. Right? So, what? So what? You die on the streets. What is really the big deal when you're old? Anyway, so, I don't know if that translated for many of you. So anyway, that grand scope of things. Anyway, that's what we have. We don't have these barns. We have these financial plans. And we want the same thing that this guy wants. Next verse. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Instead of tearing down your barns and building bigger ones, think of all the people that you could have helped. But now you're going to die, and who's it going to go to? It's just going to go away. He says, you fool, who's going to get that stuff? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. We have a choice. We have a choice to love and to trust in and to believe in money, or to help the people who God died for, to reach people who He gave up His very Son to save. And there is a choice that goes very hand in hand. Now, I wanna make clear attention, okay? Because if this is your first Sunday at church, you're sitting here going, how stereotypical is this? Right? I finally started attending church and they're talking about money, right? And I just want to make it clear. In the entire time we've existed as a church over the last year, we've only talked about, this is only the second time we've actually talked about money in a sermon, okay? So, I don't know, if you've never been to church, that's really good, okay? That's a really good percentage. But anyway, we don't talk about money a lot. In fact, what was really important to us as we started the church Because our mission, just real clear, is to make a church that the people that don't go to church love to attend. And we know that people that don't go to church, a lot of times, one of kind of the stereotypes and the reasons is because, they just talk about money and money, money. It seems like they're constantly guilting you and manipulating you, and it's just like all they wanted was your money. Now, I want to speak to that because we're very intentional about not wanting to do that because we know it is an issue. And honestly, the Bible warns of it. In 1 Timothy, same book we're reading today, in 1 Timothy, Paul warns Timothy, he says, there will come a day where people use the gospel to turn a profit, right? So that is stuff that happens. But we want to beat that stereotype. And so one thing we say before each of our offerings, which you'll experience if this is your first Sunday, we always say, hey, this is your first time. If you just started to attend here, don't worry about it. Don't feel guilty. Don't feel pressure. Just keep your wallets and your purses closed. Now, that may just seem like a cute little statement, but what we mean it by it and what it comes from is our honest desire is that the only reason that you would bring your offering to God, the only reason that you would give here is because you believe in the mission of what we're trying to accomplish. That's the only reason. Not because you're guilty, not because you're manipulated, not because, somebody's sending the offering plate by and they keep standing there and looking at you like they didn't do anything. We don't want you to give for those reasons. The only reason we would want you to give here is because you believe in the mission and what we're trying to accomplish. Now, sometimes we have a tendency to forget what it is we're trying to accomplish. And I wanted to make it clear here today. We are not gathering together just so we can get together. Our mission isn't to have a building. Our mission isn't even to pull off church services every week. Our mission very clearly is to reach people who don't go to church. Now, a few weeks ago, we made a video that kind of encapsulates our last year and kind of what happened and what our mission is. And I wanted to just kind of remind us of exactly what we're trying to do each week. So let's take a look at this video.
I guess I always believed in God and Jesus and everything, but I never had full faith.
I just didn't know what way to follow God.
I thought I could do it all on my own and handle everything on my own. I can't. I need God.
My husband, we're talking, we're like, we want to go back to church, we want to find a place,
My brother and his wife were like, oh, come to LifeBridge. I'm like, okay.
We saw the flyer that week and I'm like, Mark, look at this. I'm like, hey, you want to try it out or what?
I just completely am starting to understand things, and my kids love it. And my kids can even answer some of my questions now, which, 36 years of, me not understanding, and my little girls are understanding more, and I just think that's awesome and amazing.
The people, welcoming instead of looking at me, especially, with a little bit of ink, looking at me like I'm, I should be locked up somewhere. And, and it was a good feeling. It was a real good feeling.
You make that decision to be reborn and start over, and wash away all of my past and maybe some of my not so proud moments in my life.
I am really deciding to follow Christ, put him first in my life, and give my whole heart and soul to him and live for him completely.
By deciding to be baptized and going forward with this, I feel as though I am making my promise to stay with God, to walk with God, to be a better person, to live the kind of life that I want to live and know I can live. And it's that promise that I guess I'm not going to walk away like I have so many times in my life.
It's such an amazing commitment to make that it makes you feel really good, and that I want to strive to do my best always now. And it's a really good feeling to have.
So here's the point. This is what we do, and I just want to make this point. And again, if you're new or maybe you haven't come to church, you may not believe this, but what we believe is for those people that made that decision, their eternity was changed forever. We didn't just hand them a meal. We didn't just help them out a little bit. Their eternity was changed forever. And there is a direct connection between what we do, what we have, what we're able to do, and people's eternal destiny. Now, I want to make this point, and I'll wrap up. A lot of times we look and we say, hey, God doesn't need your money. He doesn't need my money. God owns the whole world. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. God can make money materialize out of nowhere. What? That's right. In fact, we've seen that happen at Lightbridge. He can make money happen. But the other thing is that God, for whatever reason, I don't even agree with his strategy. Okay? But for whatever reason, God is dependent on us. And God wants us to make the sacrifice, to give up our life. He said that anyone that follows me must pick up their cross and follow me. That's what he wants from us. If we're going to reach anybody, it has to come through that same sacrifice that he modeled on the cross. And so you've got this need for money, right? And our sacrifice and the people that we can reach. And here's the power. When those things go hand in hand, when people lay down their life, when people give their first fruits to God so that we can reach people that don't know him, that's when people are saved. And that's when people come to know him. And so today I just want to encourage you. And let me just make a disclaimer statement. You may not know us well enough. You may not even believe in the mission. But number one, if you do, think about how you can give your first fruits here. If you don't believe in the mission and maybe you don't know us, give your first fruits somewhere, to something that matters, and honor God with your wealth. Let me pray for you.